Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Riverwood Conservancy's webinar, Photography with a Purpose, the story of stewardship in action along the Bruce Trail corridor with Gary Hall. My name is Stephanie. I'm the Community Program Coordinator at the Riverwood Conservancy. I hope everyone is doing well. I want to say a special thanks to Credit Valley Conservation for supporting all of the work that we do. And before we get started, I just wanted to mention that all of our July programs are now live on our website. Please register for as many programs as you would like. On your screen now, you should see our entire calendar of events for July. Anything highlighted in yellow are programs that are coming up and are open to join. We're easing our way back into in-person events that adhere to public health guidelines, and we'll be offering outdoor yoga, meditation, and forest bathing events through July to September. Spaces are limited, so register for as many sessions as you would like at the riverwoodconservancy.org/events. And if you would like to support our virtual and on-site programs and conservation of Riverwood's habitat and wildlife, please consider donating on our website. We greatly appreciate any small contribution you can make. And before we get to our wonderful speaker this evening, the Riverwood Conservancy would like to acknowledge that the land on which we operate is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee nations. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this place is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and we are so grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. And tonight, we have Gary Hall, who is a retired teacher, having taught for 45 years, 35 full-time and 10 years part-time with the Peel District School Board. He has been an avid photographer for more than 50 years. Gary started to specialize in wildlife photography just over 20 years ago. He has also been a volunteer with Caledon Meals on Wheels and the Bruce Trail Conservancy, where he is currently the Land Steward Director with the Caledon Hills Bruce Trail Club. If you have any questions for Gary this evening, you can put them in the Q&A section or the comment section if you are watching on Facebook. And Gary, thanks so much for joining us. I will hand it right over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just get ready to share my screen here. Hopefully everything will work okay. Can everyone see that? I'll just get the full screen. Oops, there we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I did a presentation with the Riverwood Conservancy back in June. I think it was June the 14th. And at that point, I talked about my serendipitous journey from there to here. It was my kind of journey as a wildlife photographer, or as a photographer. So tonight's presentation is going to be talking more about the here, and it's photography with a purpose. Since I gave up the illusion of getting rich with my photography, I've really turned more to storytelling, especially storytelling about nature and about biodiversity. So, and I really love telling stories about the Bruce Trail Conservancy. Now, most people are aware of the Bruce Trail as a hiking trail, but there's much more to it than just a hiking trail. It is a conservancy, and I was just looking at one of those messages on the screen. I didn't know what it meant here. It has much more to tell than just the hiking park, and that's what I want to deal with tonight. It'll be about stewardship on the Bruce Trail. On my last presentation, I did mention that at one point I flirted with the idea of getting into more of a portrait photography, and I'm glad that I didn't. I'm glad that I took the route of going wildlife photography instead. But I do like to take candid photos, and here's an example of one of the candid photos. When I do hike on the Bruce Trail and when I do carry my camera with me, I'm always looking for opportunities to take candid pictures of hikers. And this is one where my friend Richard here had been hiking ahead, and by the time I got to this location, was sitting on this rock, and of course, his red jacket and that beautiful background behind Richard really stood out for me. So I snapped a few pictures of it, and it's one of my favorite pictures that I've taken on the Bruce Trail. Now mission statement of the Bruce Trail is preserving a ribbon of wildness for everyone forever. Now that ribbon of wilderness already exists. It's the Niagara Escarpment, but not all of it is really preserved very well. I'm going to be dealing more with the, almost entirely with the Caledon Hills section of the Bruce Trail. And it starts in the south near the Badlands in Caledon and extends up to Mono Center in the town of Mono. Parts of the ribbon of wilderness are managed by other groups, not the Bruce Trail, and the Badlands is an example. Back in the late 90s, the Bruce Trail helped acquire the Badlands, but the ownership of the property is the Ontario Heritage Trust, and right now the management of the property is the Credit Valley Conservation Authority. So the trail does go through the Badlands property. It also, a little bit further north, goes through the forks of the Credit Provincial Park, which is a provincial park. And then if you go a little bit to the east of that, it goes through the Glen Happy Conservation Area, which is managed by the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. And then up into Mono, it goes through the Hockley Valley Nature Reserve, which is a provincial park. So several provincial parks and conservation areas already existed along the Niagara Escarpment, and wherever possible, if they are on the optimum route, the Bruce Trail goes through them. And of course, these properties are managed by other groups, but not the Bruce Trail. Now, what about the other parts? The mission statement, of course, is to preserve a ribbon of wilderness, which really consists of acquiring a series of nature reserves all along the Bruce Trail corridor, all the way from Queenston Heights to Tobermory. And presently, approximately 70% of the trail is on permanent protected land. And here's an example of how it works. This map shows you a section in the Hockley Valley. On the right-hand side, you see the airport road. And on the top of the map, you see Hockley Road. And this map shows the properties in the concessions. There's a concession between the Fifth Line and the airport road. And between 2009, when the property over here called Hemlock Ridges was acquired, and then 2016, where this property in here was acquired, 5 different properties were acquired by the Bruce Trail. And now there's a continuous conservation corridor. It really consists of 2 nature reserves, one of them being Hemlock Ridges. And then the 4 properties to the right here are part of the Cedar Highlands property or package. The Bruce Trail is one of Ontario's largest land trusts, and it's been directly involved in protecting almost over 16,000 acres of land on the Niagara Escarpment. Just recently, a large parcel of land was purchased in the Bruce Peninsula at Cape Chin, 500 acres. The area of land stewarded by the PTC is now just over 11,000 acres. Now, you may wonder what the difference is between helping to protect 16,000 and managing only 11,000. Well, the picture to the right shows Driftwood Cove, which is about 3,000 acres that was acquired about 3 years ago. And it was a joint effort between Parks Canada and the Bruce Trail Conservancy. And the property is managed by Parks Canada, not the Bruce Trail. But the Bruce Trail has 8 kilometers of trail now secure that runs along the coastline of Georgian Bay. And that was really an exciting event when it happened a couple of years ago. So the Bruce Trail does get involved in joint efforts in purchasing property. And in some cases, the Bruce Trail manages them. And in some cases, other agencies manage them. So I'm going to be just highlighting a few of the properties and some of the issues that we deal with on the Bruce Trail. This property is called Maple Cross Nature Reserve at Cannings Falls. Now, Cannings Falls is located in Mono, just west of the Hockley Valley Nature Reserve, and it's located on the Nottawasaga. I believe this is the north branch of the Nottawasaga River, which is a cold water stream. Over the years, it's become, especially recently with the prevalence of social media, it's become a real problem with the previous landowners because on a typical weekend, you would have hundreds of trespassers on this property, because as people would send pictures, would post pictures on their social media, and of course take selfies at Cannings Falls. It became very, very popular. And over the last couple of years, the whole property has been trampled on by trespassers. Garbage has been left down near the falls. In some cases, the rocks have been painted. People party there till midnight, have barbecues and so on. So the property was acquired about 1.5 years ago by the Bruce Trail. And the first thing we do when we acquire a property is to secure the property. And that's happening right now. And the story of how that's happening would be a presentation in itself. But the trespassing has dramatically decreased over the last year. So it's about a 70-acre property of forest and river habitat. This is a property in the Hockley Valley called Hemlock Ridges. Now, I've been the land steward of Hemlock Ridges for about 9 years now, and it's 57 acres altogether. When it was purchased, and just prior to purchase, it was used as a paintball park, and there were also ATV trails through the property. After it was acquired, we secured the property, and over the last, well, this is since about 2012, we have a few issues with it. The main issue that we have right now is through companies coming in and foraging for wild mushrooms and leeks and fiddleheads. I may be talking about that a little bit later. I will be showing some of the photos of Hemlock Ridges because it's a property that I'm very familiar with. I know it like the back of my hand, and to me, this is my property, and I get very upset if anybody messes with it. This is a wetland property that was acquired a couple of years ago. It's called the Quarryside Nature Reserve. It's near Inglewood, and it was a sandstone quarry. And what you're looking at here is a picture of one of the old sandstone quarries. Hasn't been quarried probably for over 50 years. So you can see here how nature really, really regenerates itself if left alone. But the major issue with it is garbage. There are a few little dump sites like this throughout the property. I sometimes say that you could find everything in here but the kitchen sink, but if you looked hard enough, I would lay odds that you would find a kitchen sink. There is a hot tub. You can see all of the trash here, and this is just one of a few of the areas. And the issue with this is how do you get it out, because the property is landlocked. The entrance to the property, or what used to be the entrance at one point, I guess, is on the road allowance of Chincoosea Road, and you couldn't get a car up there at all. The previous owners had to come in through a neighboring property. So until we can get permission to come in through a neighboring property, we're not going to be able to clear this up. But you can see that there's even a house on the property, which will eventually be torn down. A bulldozer on the property. I don't think there's any way we could get it out. I don't think we want to get it out because it will add to the historical significance of the property. This is one of a series of properties between Inglewood and Bellefontaine. And this is where the much of the sandstone came from in building many of the buildings in Toronto. And even the sandstone used at Jasper Lodge, I was told, used sandstone from this area. And you'd wonder why an area in the Rockies would use sandstone from the Inglewood area. And the reason for that is because of the very high quality of this particular sandstone. Some of the sandstone quarries are still under operation. No trail on this property at the moment. Will be a little while before we'll have a trail through the property. But right now we are managing it. It really, really does hold an awful lot of promise for biodiversity. The Gosling Forest and Nature Reserve, it's deciduous forest and meadow. We really don't have a lot of issues with this property right now. It's just a favorite with hikers and photographers, as you can see here. Now, how do we manage to look after 11,000 acres of property with volunteers? Well, there are a few people who are full-time staff. There are 4 actual full-time staff members. who work with the stewardship branch of the Bruce Trail. Some of them also work with the trail development team as well. So one of them is the manager of conservation and trail, and he's over here. This is Adam Brolowski. And then we have a land stewardship coordinator and ecologist who focuses mainly on the land stewardship, and it's Brian Poplar, who is right here. We have a landowner stewardship coordinator who works with landowners who permit our trail to go through their property and helps them with stewardship issues. She's not she's not in this particular photograph. And we also have a cartographer, Scott Langley, who does all of the maps. And when we're going through the properties and marking the boundaries and so on, we really rely on these maps that Scott puts together for us. The Bruce Trail Conservancy, not just in the Caledon section, but for the whole trail, the whole corridor, has over 1,500 volunteers. It's just estimated that their volunteers provide the equivalent of 85 full-time jobs. And if you consider the minimum wage of $14 an hour, the value would be almost $2.5 million of labor each year. Now, most of these people are professionals and in their working career got much more than $14 an hour. When you get down to the club level, okay, we have the full-time staff, and each club, and there are 9 clubs in the Bruce Trail, each club has a Land Steward Director, and I have the honor of being the Land Steward Director for the Caledon Hills Bruce Trail Club. And it's a volunteer job that I really love. My job is to coordinate the activities of the land stewards in the Caledon Hills section, to support them as much as possible, also to train new land stewards whenever we get a new property, whenever a new land steward comes on. There's a little bit of training that has to happen. We also get into training other volunteers as well. We have some really good land stewards who are very good at helping out with this training. So there are 18 land stewards in the Caledon Hills section who look after 23 properties along the Caledon Hills section. And these properties range in size from 0.5 acres to 70 acres. And it's a total of 450 acres altogether. Now, what do we do? What do the land stewards do? How do we conserve our ribbon of wilderness? I took this picture just last Friday. This is a new property that is northwest of Inglewood. It's called the Caledon Mountain Springs. There's no trail on it just yet. In fact, the property was just purchased last year. I wasn't even on it until about a year ago. And what we're doing here is going through the property with GPS in hand, and we're looking for the survey posts, the little pegs in the ground. And we are able to do that thanks to the maps, the map that is provided by Scott Langley, and thanks to learning at least the basics of using a GPS. Here we are again. It's mostly wooded land, but an awful lot of bush in a few areas that look like this, and a lot of wetland as well. It holds an awful lot of promise for biodiversity. All we have to do now is to secure it and keep other activities out. When we go through the properties with our GPS, of course, we look for the little survey posts, which may be sticking. If you're lucky, they're sticking maybe 3 or 4 inches out of the ground. They may be about 1 inch square. And this one, the surveyors had as they surveyed the property again, they found the original bar, of course, and they put this stake, nailed it to the tree, because the bar itself is actually inside this tree. If you take your hiking pole and poke it into the bottom of that tree, it goes clang. We never would have found it had the surveyors not put that little stake on the tree. And you'll notice above the tree there's a yellow property. It's a boundary marker showing that that's one of the boundaries of the Bruce Trail. And it's really important we know where these boundaries are. Once we find the survey posts, then we go in with a team of volunteers and we pound in, using a post pounder, we pound in a T-bar and then attach our property markers on the side. Now this is on the Cannings Falls property. You can see the rushing waters of the Niagara River behind us. And this is really going to be the jewel of the properties that we have in the Caledon Hills section. There's a series of 4 waterfalls as the Niagara River tumbles over the edge of the Niagara Escarpment. This is I'll just illustrate here the importance of knowing where our boundaries are. When I took this picture, I put this post in about 5 weeks ago. When I took this picture, I'm standing on a neighboring property. I'm not actually on our property. I'm looking into a property called Matilda's Way. And the reason I put this post in here and the sign, well, first of all, the land steward, because of COVID, lives in Guelph and hasn't been able to get to the property, so I did the job. And the reason I put the post in, you can see that the neighbor had cut a little swath into the property, and actually cut a swath about this wide all the way around the property. And we're trying to maintain this property as preserve it for nesting birds. And grasshopper sparrows have been noted on the property. This one was taken on a nearby property, but grasshopper sparrow is a species of special concern, and not the only one. There are field sparrows, meadowlarks in the area, and we want to promote these species as much as possible. So we can't have people coming into the property cutting the grass. Now, since I put the post in last time I visited it, the post is still there, but the landowner came in and cut the north end of the property. So I'm going to have to make a visit and be very diplomatic about it and friendly as possible, and see if we can get that activity to stop, and let him know why the property, why we're asking people not to trespass on it, what exactly we're trying to do on the property. In other words, provide them with the information rather than say, just keep out and don't come onto our land. We'd like to maintain good relations with our neighbors. We also plant trees to restore forest and increase wildlife corridors, but we also, in some cases, will plant trees, native species, so that we can attract bird species. We try to, most of the properties we have in the Caledon Hills section are forested, but we have a few that have meadows on it, and we try not to plant trees all over the meadows, because it's very, very important that we keep our meadow properties and preserve them as meadows for the meadow species. We identify and document species at risk, and you may recognize this as a wood thrush, and it's a species of special concern. There are different levels of the species at risk. I guess this, the special concern is the lowest level, they have been declining quite a bit in the last 40 years, mainly because of habitat loss, and also the declining insect population, because many of these birds rely on insects for food. This is an eastern wood peewee, another species of special concern. I hear these birds nearly every time I go onto one of the Bruce Trail wooded properties. There are a lot of them on the Bruce Trail, but if you think of all of the forests that you will find in southern Ontario, the majority of those forests will be found on the Oak Ridges Moraine and along the Niagara Escarpment. So they are on our properties. There isn't really a shortage of them, but when you consider Ontario overall, they are a species of special concern. Again, this is a flycatcher. It's the eastern wood peewee. It's a flycatcher, and it relies on insects. And if the insects aren't there, then the birds won't be there. And what is it that affects the insects? Well, it's the disappearance of native plants, and that can happen because of overgrazing by white-tailed deer, and also by the prevalence of invasive species. And I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. I think everybody is aware of the situation of the monarch butterfly. Again, it's another species of special concern, and we're trying, especially in the meadow properties, to encourage the growth of milkweed as much as possible, because the caterpillar of the monarch butterfly relies totally on the milkweed plant. It can't exist if the eggs are laid on any other plant. The snapping turtle, again, is a special concern. This one was not photographed on the Bruce Trail property. It was photographed on the Caledon Trailway, but we do have snapping turtles on the Corside Nature Reserve property. And I would imagine they're in the Caledon Mountain Springs property as well. I haven't really had an awful lot of time to thoroughly get to know that property. The bobolink is a threatened species. This is one step up from special concern, and they rely on undisturbed meadows. Whenever the Bruce Trail acquires a property, if a property has been in agriculture, for example, at the Cannings Falls property, there is part of that property that has been used for agriculture over the last several years, and it's still used as agriculture. The Bruce Trail has acquired the property, but they keep it in agriculture. But there's a specification that whoever is pulling the hay off the property or planting oats or whatever they're doing, there's a specification that they're not allowed to cut any of those crops until after the 15th of July, when the young birds have a chance to fledge. Barn swallows are also threatened. We have barn swallows, a colony of them on the Quarryside Nature Reserve. These birds are disappearing because many of the farm buildings have disappeared over the years and replaced by metal buildings, and also the insect population that has been declining because they're also insectivores. The eastern meadowlark. This particular one was not photographed on the Bruce Trail. It was photographed in the Caledon Albar a few years ago. I put this one on because I happened to get a close-up picture of an eastern meadowlark. I see them all the time and I hear them all the time on the Bruce Trail properties, but they're way off in the distance. The song is really, really beautiful. I love hearing these songs as I'm going through the properties. They're also a meadow bird that relies on undisturbed grasslands until their young can fledge. The butternut tree is an endangered species. This is one step up, again, one step below the extirpated or not even having them at all. This is a healthy butternut tree that I photographed about 3 years ago on one of our properties. There are a lot of butternut trees on the Bruce Trail, all kinds of them, but most of them, almost all of them that I've seen, all except this particular one, have been diseased. And here's an example of a diseased tree. It's affected by the butternut canker, and that tree will eventually die. There's no cure for it. The trees are protected by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. In fact, it's illegal to cut these down. If for some reason we have to cut down what they call a retainable tree, a retainable just means it can just have one branch with leaves on it. If we have to cut down a retainable tree, we have to apply for special permission to cut it down. And the reason that they want to retain these trees as long as possible, they do last for a long time. They don't die over, in one season, but they want to see if they can find the nuts from some trees that will be disease resistant. And this is a tree. In fact, we had 20 of them that we planted on this property, and we had to get special permission from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to purchase this tree from a nursery. Not anybody, just anybody can't walk into a nursery and get a butternut tree. They're that protected, they're that special. Bird surveys. Now, when I first became a land steward for Hemlock Ridges, one of the job descriptions was I had to visit the property at least twice a year, hike the boundaries, check to see if there was any encroachment. But we're also encouraged to make a list of the fauna and flora that we see on the property. Now, in my last presentation, I talked about my journey from there to here, and it was actually about 9 years ago, I guess, when they needed a land steward for this property. Prior to this, I was working with the trail development team on as a trail captain and also on building trails. But it was a rather selfish move on my part to volunteer to be the land steward, because I saw it as an opportunity to take pictures of birds and get in with my camera, which I've done over the years. So the next few pictures that you're going to see were all taken on Hemlock Ridges and also staying on the trail, because we don't want people moving off the trail. The only people who are really permitted to go off the trail are our volunteers for a specific purpose, and the land stewards who are checking the property boundaries. So all of these pictures were taken on the trail, and this, of course, you'll recognize as a barred owl. I see them occasionally on the property. We have had breeding pairs over the years. This year, I don't think we've had a breeding pair on the property, but on neighboring properties, because early in the season, I used to hear them calling to each other. And when you're in the wild all by yourself in the forest, to hear that call, the "who cooks for you" of the barred owl, and hear another one answering is really, really special. Also, last year when I was working on pulling garlic mustard, I would hear the adults communicating with their young, the fledglings, and there was a family on the property last year, and that's always exciting to hear. The black-throated green warbler is a very common bird on Hemlock Ridges, as most of the Bruce Trail properties, the wooded properties. It's one of the most common sounds that I hear, and the black-throated green warbler is one of them that really thrives on eating the gypsy moth. Not very many birds will bother trying to. They have a hard time, I guess, digesting the gypsy moth, but the black-throated green warbler is one of them that will do that. We need more of these birds around. Here's another bird that is really prevalent in Hemlock Ridges. It's the ovenbird. The ovenbird is a species of warbler. Called an ovenbird from the shape of the nest that it lays, or that it makes, usually on or near the ground, and the nest is in the shape of a Dutch oven. Beautiful little birds, very, very noisy. They're the ones that supposedly sound like teacher, teacher, teacher. One of the loudest birds on the property, very tiny warbler species. This is one of my favorite warblers. It's the black Broonian warbler. Now, I don't think this is a resident of Hemlock Ridges. Can't be sure of that, because I've just been learning to identify birds by sound over the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm not that adept at recognizing the sound of the black Broonian warbler just yet. I think this one was just passing through. You can see the importance of having nature reserves for birds as they migrate, because birds do need a place to rest overnight or a couple of days, and they also need a source of food, as you can see by this one who has caught an insect. Beautiful, beautiful birds. It'll be interesting to know if these particular birds do hang around. I'll have to listen to it more intently next year when I'm on the property. There are a lot of woodpeckers. I guess in most of the wooded properties now, there always have been, but with the ash trees dying, there's a lot of food sources for woodpeckers. And I think I photographed about 6 different species of woodpecker on Hemlock Ridges. And this, of course, is the pileated woodpecker. This is the hairy woodpecker. It was interesting. I was working on pulling garlic mustard. This was last year, and this one parked itself on this stump. A beautiful background. I was about 25 feet away from my camera at the time, but it did hang around long enough for me to retrieve my camera and take a few pictures. This is a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Drilling a hole, it's probably drilling, well, obviously drilling one as a nesting hole, and you can see that the chips are really, really flying here. These birds normally just drill little shallow sap wells in the side of a tree that collect sap, so they can come in later and suck the sap out of it, hence the name sapsucker. Well, those sap wells also collect insects, so that the sapsuckers themselves, as well as other birds, hummingbirds especially, love to come in and feed from those sap wells. This is a veery thrush. Again, I'm not sure whether it's a full-time resident, because I haven't learned to recognize the sound. Well, I'm starting to recognize this sound a little bit better, but I haven't heard any over the last few weeks in Hemlock Ridges. But this was photographed early last spring. One of my favorite bird sounds is the one of the hermit thrush. It's a beautiful sound, and I'll play it for you a little bit later. These birds there's at least one or two on the property. Very, very loud, beautiful song. Been singing there all summer long. If you hear the sound, you'll never forget it. And of course, the great crested flycatcher, a very common bird in Hemlock Ridges, relies, of course, on insects. Now we log not just birds, but also other species as well. And this is the red eft, which is a juvenile stage of the eastern newt, I think it is. And most of those species, you don't see them that often because they're down in the leaf litter, and we don't like to disturb that anymore, and we have to. In fact, we didn't disturb this one at all. It just happened to be out in the open. Then, of course, there's the flora on the property. If you like an area to go to in the spring to see all kinds of spring flowers, several Bruce Trail properties are good for that. Hemlock Ridges is really outstanding. You get the trilliums, the red trilliums, the white trilliums, all kinds of wildflowers. And you don't really have to leave the trail for it either. In fact, I think I showed this picture in my last presentation, but when you're trained as a photographer, especially a wildlife photography, you know to look for the fine details and be able to pick out something that looks like this, a trillium, I guess you'd call it a quadrillium, with 4 petals instead of 3. Now, I mentioned that earlier on when I started as a land steward, I really wasn't terribly adept at recognizing the different plants. But now, thanks to iNaturalist, it has really, really opened doors. The technology now, just over the last couple of years, that we can use now as land stewards. So here, I would understand that some people in the presentation tonight will be using iNaturalist, so we'll be quite familiar with it. But I'll just illustrate how it works. Richard here is taking a picture of a plant on a mossy rock in the Cannings Falls property, and I'm just a few feet away taking a picture of a similar plant. It's called a walking fern. If you're not familiar with the walking fern, it doesn't look like a fern, but you're not familiar with it, it's because they have broad leaves and they come out to a tip, and then that tip embeds itself in the rock, and then it'll send out another long leaf, and it appears to walk across the rock. Now, the important thing is when you take a digital photo, it embeds different information right in the photo. And with iNaturalist, as long as you allow your phone to track you while you're using the app, then it'll put in a little bit of extra information, like the information down here. So it'll log the latitude, the longitude, and the altitude. Now, iNaturalist is a worldwide organization, but several organizations, small organizations and large organizations, have what they call projects. So the Bruce Trail has a project. I would imagine that the Riverwood Conservancy has a project, and that allows the volunteers, anybody going through the properties, to take pictures of different species, and it builds up the database, which is really important to understanding the biodiversity of a particular property. So this information, I've joined 2 projects so far. The Bruce Trail Conservancy is one of them, and the other one is invasive species, because I've been logging the location of dog strangling, especially dog strangling vine, over the last, well, especially this summer. Here's one of our land stewards taking a picture with a cell phone of a butternut tree, and you can notice the butternut tree is one of the diseased ones that has the butternut canker. But here's how it works: when the picture is taken and sent into the Bruce Trail or just to iNaturalist, but also attached to the Bruce Trail project, the Bruce Trail can go in and bring up a little map like this on the left, and it shows all of the locations over here that have been noted for butternut trees. And this just covers the area from about Bell Fountain in the south up to the Hockley Road in the Hockley Valley in the north. And the Bruce Trail has only had this project for the last year or so. And if I were to print another map today, you would see many, many more locations of butternut trees along the Bruce Trail corridor, because more and more of us are using this app an iNaturalist to help the Bruce Trail locate or build up their database of different species along the Bruce Trail corridor, especially on their properties. We're also now starting to train anybody who's interested. These are just people who hike the Bruce Trail regularly. And we had a little workshop, a little training session actually about a week and a half ago at Hemlock Ridges. We're offering another one on June the 30th. It's going to be held over at the Arboretum in Guelph. It won't be on the Bruce Trail. Now, we did a little bit of an introduction in the parking lot of Hemlock Ridges. It's on the fifth line east of Mono, just south of the Hockley Road. But you could hardly get the participants out of the parking lot. They were so excited with their cell phones, taking pictures and trying to identify them. So we used two apps. One of them, Seek, and the other, iNaturalist. Seek is owned by iNaturalist. Seek is a good way to identify the species to begin with, and then you can attach it to iNaturalist and then eventually send that data into iNaturalist and the Bruce Trail. No, we're also starting to use the Merlin app more. I've been using the Merlin app. I've been using that app for a few years now, but mainly so that if I hear a bird and I think that, hey, well, maybe that one is a grosbeak, then I could go into explore birds and then listen to the sound just to kind of confirm whether it was a rose-breasted grosbeak or not. But about a month ago, Merlin came out with their sound app, and this is just too good to be true. And I'll just show you how it works. I would imagine that many of you are using this and playing with it already. When I talked about not being able to recognize the song of the Blackburnian warbler or the veery, well, now it's really a piece of cake just using the sound ID. So when you bring up the Merlin, this is the screen that you see, start bird ID, get photo, and then sound. So if you click on here, the sound ID, you get a screen like this. If you click on that screen, it's going to take a recording. And this is a recording that I took. I knew it was a hermit thrush, but that's that beautiful sound of the hermit thrush. Here, we'll just stop this so we don't go on and on. That's that beautiful sound of the hermit thrush. And when you do that on the Merlin app, then immediately, just within a split second, as soon as it hears that sound, this is what you see, hermit thrush. That really confirms what you thought you were hearing, or if you didn't have a clue what it was, it'll give you an idea of what it is. And then if you press on this one, when you get home, you can actually email that soundtrack to yourself. I keep the recordings. I have them on a file on my computer, and then I can attach that file to iNaturalist. So I don't have to have the picture of the bird or a particular bird for iNaturalist. I can just attach the sound. So the technology has really upped our game significantly within the last year, and with Land Stewards on the Bruce Trail. Another thing that we do on the Bruce Trail is we construct and install birdhouses each year, except for the last 2 years, of course. We've had our Bruce Trail Day, and one of our activities on Bruce Trail Day is to have kids put together bird boxes for us. And then, of course, we have to install the bird boxes and put predator guards on them. And if we're lucky, we have about 40 bird boxes altogether on our different properties. Not all of them are going to have bluebirds. The other species that you see are tree swallows, house wrens. Those are the two most common ones. The odd time we'll get chickadees in the boxes as well. But in this particular case, we had a male and female bluebird preparing to build a nest on the Vallis property. That's what the V8 means. It's box number 8 on the Vallis property. There are 10 boxes on that property altogether. And of course, this is what we hope to see. This was taken about 3 years ago on the Vallis property. A young bluebird had recently fledged, and I was lucky enough to get a picture of it. Now, when you have bird boxes on properties, you have to look after them. So we do have a volunteer who specializes in birds and on recognizing the different birds that you'll see in the bird boxes. His name is Don Hamilton. He's also a land steward, but he looks after and records the activity in all of the bird boxes. So he visits the boxes 2 or 3 times a year. And of course, in the fall, we have to clean the boxes out. And I always make a point, if I'm available, going out with him, because I learn an awful lot about the different kinds of birds that you'll see in the bird boxes. And here's Dawn showing me a nest. I think this is a bluebird nest. I like to take pictures of the different nests so that we can recognize, what kinds of nests each species of birds will build. And then I also take pictures of the boxes of what we see in the box. And this is what you see in most of the boxes, more than one nest, because bluebirds, for example, will lay up to 3 different clutches of eggs a year. And here in the bottom, you have a bluebird nest, and on the top, the house wren nest. You can see house wrens are kind of messy, and they build a nest right up to the very top. Sometimes, I think there was once we saw 3 different layers. It was chickadee in the bottom, and maybe bluebird, and then tree swallow on top of that. So it's really interesting to see it. Now, all of this material has to be cleaned out every fall so that the birds will have a clean box to go to the next spring. We manage invasive species. We monitor invasive species where they are. And in this case, some of our volunteers, these are our Tuesday hikers who gave up a day to pick garlic mustard on the Songbird Nature Reserve. And if you don't look after your garlic mustard, this is what it can look like. Because of COVID, the last couple of years, we haven't been able to keep on top of all of our properties. You can see that there is a side trail, a blue trail that's supposed to go through here somewhere, but that's all garlic mustard. If you just leave it year after year after year, you have a real problem, and we have a real problem in this particular section of trail. Another invasive species, there are 3 main ones that we're concerned with. There are a lot of invasive species, but 3 that we're working on with right now. A 4th one, Phragmites, we found on one of the latest properties. We'll have to deal with that a little bit later on too. But buckthorn is another invasive species. And with the buckthorn, birds really, really love buckthorn. Buckthorn will grow in little groves and crowd out native species. And in the fall, you can see the black berries here are buckthorn, the red ones aren't. And birds like cedar waxwings love this kind of fruit. In fact, in the fall, they can actually get drunk by eating berries like this. But the problem with the buckthorn berries is it is a diuretic. It gives the birds diarrhea. And that's how the seed is spread through different properties as they fly over properties and they poop out eliminate, and then it spreads the seeds all over the place. And in the fall, it's a real problem because that can also weaken the bird and can cause it to die, especially because they need the energy as they're making their journey south in the fall. And if we get, the key to invasive species is to get them really, really early. And if we can get it early when it's a young plant, we can take them out using an implement like this called an extractigator. This is another kind of a candid photo, the kind of photo that I like to take as a photographer, is people doing what people do without even realizing I'm taking the photo. Okay, we'll get to the next one here. Here we are. Now, this is the one that I'm most concerned about. It's European swallowwort, also known as dog strangling vine. Easily recognized, here I'll go back up to the previous one again, easily recognized via these pretty pink flowers. You can see why it may have been popular with gardeners way back. It was introduced from Eastern Europe. Not a problem in Eastern Europe because it has natural predators there. Here it does not. There are no natural predators, so it just goes out of control. And here's one that I dug out about 2 weeks ago. It's really scary to see if you dig one out by the roots. Now, if we find a single plant or even a small patch of up to 15 or 20 plants, we'll try digging them out. That's the best way of trying to get on top of it. But you have to do that when you see a single plant or a very, very small patch. This was the original plant here, but you can see that the root has sent up another strand here. There's another one happening here, and each of these roots, they spread underground and send up other strands, and these strands just wind around each other and eventually can just take over. And the dog strangling vine is a danger to the monarch butterfly because the plant is related to the milkweed. It can confuse monarch butterflies. And if monarch butterflies lay their eggs on the dog strangling vine, those eggs will never mature. because the caterpillars rely totally on milkweed. Now we don't have to worry about this one laying eggs. That's a male monarch. You can tell by that little black dot on the wing. Okay. This is an area that I like to visit, about a 10-minute walk from where I live. This is on the Caledon Trailway, but I'm just showing this to illustrate the dangers of letting dog strangling vine get out of control. This plant, this is a white admiral butterfly on spreading dogbane. And spreading dogbane is a magnet for butterflies and other insects. They love it. So if you're a photographer liking to take pictures of insects and butterflies, just find a patch of dogbane and spend 15 or 20 minutes, and you'll get tons and tons of pictures and many different species of insect. But you can see in this patch of spreading dogbane, you're starting to see a few little plants of the dog strangling vine. Eventually that dog strangling vine, if left unchecked, will take over the whole patch. It'll crowd out the spreading dogbane. It'll deplete the food source of insects, butterflies and other insects and hummingbirds, which will again take away the food source of birds. And that's why it's one reason why many of our insects and birds have been declining over the years. This plus the declining habitat. If left unchecked, this is what dog strangling vine can look like. This is an area, it's actually on a road allowance. It's a road allowance that we want to go through. Well, we were hoping to go through it to get our trail onto a new property, but we're going to have to detour around this somehow, because this goes on for, I'd say 1 or 2, at least 100 meters. And a road allowance is 66 feet wide, and it covers most of the road allowance. So I would venture to say that there are millions of plants in here. And we saw that root ball a few minutes ago. You can just imagine what it looks like in the ground, just underground on this patch. A real problem. We lost the battle on this particular one. The only way of getting rid of this will be to spray it. And that gets very costly. It costs thousands of dollars to spray that. It's actually on the town of Caledon road allowance. And in the fall, this is what it looks like. Because it's related to the milkweed, it has little seed pods. You saw them in an earlier one, they were green, but here are the seed pods as they dry up, and then they produce these fluff-like parachutes, just like a milkweed plant, and that's how it spreads via the wind, but also through hikers. If there's a plant that is right on the edge of a trail, you're going to get it on your pant legs and you're going to spread it along the trail. And people who walk their dogs, especially if you walk your dog off leash. And for those of you who do have dogs, I would really encourage you, when you're on a nature reserve, to keep the dog on a leash, because they can really wreak havoc with native species and spread our invasive species. But this is what it can look like, what it looks like in the fall. It's really scary. Here we have an eastern towhee, and you can see that these birds do rely on caterpillars and grubs. And if we have a lot of invasive species around, we won't have as many caterpillars, grubs, and insects around. This particular one was kind of cute. He just sat on this tree. This is the male, and he was calling. And a few feet away, you could hear the mate calling. And the mate kind of is saying, "Not yet, dear. Don't need you just yet." He's just sitting there waiting until he can be called into the nest, so we can feed these to the young birds. This is a phoebe, again, with an insect. If we want to have these birds around, we have to have insects. And one way that we can encourage insects is to manage the invasive species. Every little bit we can do helps. And this brings me to my last slide. This is a fern, one of the ferns that I photographed on hemlock ridges. And you can see the fiddleheads down here. And this is the main problem that we have on hemlock ridges and some of our other properties. The Bruce Trail gives access to everyone. You don't have to be a member, but we encourage everyone to stay on the trail and not go off the trail. But foraging has become such a popular activity over the last few years. There are foraging Facebook pages. You see foraging articles in magazines. You hear people on CBC radio talking about buying forage products at the St. Lawrence market. Well, you have to wonder, and if you do see foraged products at a market, it's fair enough to ask, where did they come from? These forage products are very expensive because the growing season is very short. So we do have groups, commercial groups, who come into our properties now and completely strip an area. On hemlock ridges along the main trail, almost all of our wild leeks have disappeared over the last 2 or 3 years. And now they're getting at the fiddleheads and at the morels as well. And it is a real problem. And I'm not exactly sure what we're going to, how we're going to solve that particular problem. All I would say is encourage any of you who are hikers, if you see people off the trail and if they appear to be foraging, just say something. Don't confront them in a way that you're going to, get yourself assaulted in some way, but let them know that they're in an area that they really shouldn't be in. Anyway, that really finishes my presentation. If you're interested in more information on the Bruce Trail, you can see that the website of the Bruce Trail Conservancy is just brucetrail.org. It's an easy one to remember. The Caledon Hills Bruce Trail Club is just caledonbrucetrail.org. And if anybody wants to contact me, you can contact me through my email here at garyhall@rogers.com, or you can get a contact from Stephanie, who has it as well. Anyway, Stephanie, I'll turn it back over to you. And I'll stop the share screen here as well.
Thanks so much, Gary. That was a great presentation. And you are doing some really amazing work, a lot of work, it seems.
Very similar, I suspect, to the work that you're doing at Riverwood Conservancy.
Yes, yeah, we finally are back on site, and our conservation specialist, Derek, is hard at work with a lot of volunteers trying to get back into managing all the invasive species and all the damage that has happened over the pandemic. So yeah, very similar work. It's a lot of work though, and I'm sure that you're busy right now.
Well, I spend at least 3 to 4 days a week, usually mornings, but not because I have to, because I really enjoy it, and I try to get my camera as well. So it's not all work; it's a lot of play as well.
Yeah, your photographs are amazing in there. They're really great. So we did have a couple questions that came in. One of them that came up was, how can we support the work that you do on the Bruce Trail? So as a community member, how can we support you?
Well, I think the main way is to become, just like the Riverwood Conservancy, is to become a member, because that's how we're funded. I get my funds if I have to build any structures on the Bruce Trail. If I have, for example, I'm forever buying T-posts to put in boundary markers. Well, a lot of that is funded through membership fees. When you hike the trail, you hike across bridges, boardwalks, and stiles, and most of that comes from membership fees. The other way is if you just want to, make a donation. We're always looking for donations as well. The Bruce Trail spends, I would say, a couple of $1 million a year on purchasing new properties.
Wow.
On an earlier slide that nearly 70% of the trail is secure. That means 70% of the trail goes through nature reserves. That was a pipe dream a few years ago, but 70% is amazing right now. And we hope to get that as close to 100% as we possibly can. And that money, the money that comes into the Bruce Trail comes in mostly from members, but also corporate sponsors. Very little, less than 0.1%, I would say, comes in through governments.
Wow. And this is just a question out of curiosity. With all the housing development that's happening in Southern Ontario, are any of these properties at risk right now?
Well, we're always in a competition, when a property comes up for sale. And we have a team, there's a landowner relations team who are visiting landowners all the time. On the Bruce Trail, we have what we call an optimum route. And we keep in touch with landowners along the Bruce Trail on properties that we'd really like, and let them know that at some point if they want to sell their property, we would be willing buyers. In many cases, people will donate part of their property, and sometimes the whole property, and there are tax advantages to doing that. So people are very, very generous. It's a well-respected organization, and people are very, very generous. Another way that you can support, the Bruce Trail or any kind of a trail is, if you get to recognize something like dog strangling vine. When I hike, I carry a little bag in my backpack, usually a garbage bag, and if I see a single plant or one of these small patches, I'll just take with my index finger and forefinger, take the plant thing down the bottom of the plant, and then lift up and strip all of the leaves and the seed pods off, and then put them in the bag. And eventually I'll just put those in a garbage bag and let them cook in the sun for about 3 weeks, and put them in the garbage, not the compost. Put them in the garbage. That way you're not going to kill a plant, but you're going to keep the seed pods from developing and spreading. Now, the plant will still spread through the roots, but it's not going to spread through hikers and by animals and dogs.
That's awesome. That's a lot of work that you're doing. There's another question that came in on Facebook. What percentage of the land you steward is meadow habitat? Are most of those agricultural acquisitions?
I would say most of them aren't agricultural acquisitions, but there are a few, and as I said, they are always kept in agriculture. There's one property I think it's in the Iroquois section. The Iroquois section is in basically from Milton down to about Grimsby, I guess, and it was an agricultural property. When it was sold to the Bruce Trail, nobody was interested in maintaining it as an agricultural property. So the Bruce Trail planted a wild grass prairie on the property. So they'll do something like that as well. But in the Caledon section, we don't have a lot of grassland. But of the grassland properties we have, the only one that is in agriculture is the one that I mentioned at Cannings Falls.
And just going off of your comments on picking and foraging in these places, is there any place that you can actually forage wild plants? I'm really curious on this because, I see wild fiddleheads at almost every store here in Toronto. So I'm just wondering, is there anywhere you actually can pick these fiddleheads or other things?
Basically, there is nothing wrong with foraging, provided that you do it responsibly. Now, these commercial outfits don't do it responsibly. They clean everything out. Mm-hmm. So if you pull every fiddlehead off a fern, it'll die. But if you do it responsibly, and if you have permission of the landowner. Now, nature reserve, I'm sure in the Riverwood, you don't want anybody foraging. And on our nature reserves, we don't want anybody foraging either. The other problem we have is the Bruce Trail gives people access to private property. And our landowners, whenever we have irresponsible behavior happening on the property, kick us off the property, which means that the trail has to be rerouted onto the road. And that does happen occasionally.
Right. I guess it's kind of the same thing as blueberries, right? You can pick a few blueberries, but don't pick the entire plant.
I would say that picking something like raspberries or blueberries or picking an apple, as long as you're staying on the trail, I don't think I'd have any difficulty with it, because you're not digging up, you're not tramping over over plants, and you're really not hurting the plant by pulling a blueberry or a raspberry or an apple off it.
Right. Yeah, we do ask at Riverwood that you don't pick anything at all, just because we're kind of a small area and we're surrounded by a city. So, any little bit of picking can make a big dramatic change to the environment, right?
No, I think that we prefer that as well.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make a big deal of it if I saw somebody doing it. In fact, I've been known to pick a few raspberries. So.
Sometimes they just look too sweet.
I'll just know enough to stay off the Riverwood property when I do it.
Yeah, we'll be after you. No, I'm just kidding. There was one more comment that Terrence posted in the chat here, and he just said that this would be a good time to plug the Riverwood's iNaturalist project, which I think you mentioned a little bit about before, Gary. And I posted both the Riverwood Conservancy's iNaturalist and Bruce Trail iNaturalist in the chat. A lot of conservancies are starting to use iNaturalist. It's a really awesome app, and we've done BioBlitzes off of it before. We're hoping to do more in the future. So yeah, we just posted those in the chat if you want to join either of those projects and get out there and take photos. It's a really cool way to identify different plants and animals too.
Well, I can certainly join the Riverwood project. I won't be taking any pictures on the Riverwood property unless I happen to be down in Mississauga. But if you're interested in others, I can always include you.
Likewise, Gary, we'll do the same for you.
That's great, thank you.
And one last thing, also from Terrence, he said Terrence, sorry. He said there's another new audio bird ID called BirdNet. I have not heard of that one. Have you heard of that yet, Gary?
I've heard of it.
Okay.
I've been a Merlin user for a few years now, and I don't know whether BirdNet is a free app or not, but Merlin is free, as is iNaturalist, and you know, I'm cheap. I try to use free things as long as they're good. Now I find that iNaturalist isn't particularly good at identifying trees. If I take a picture of a tree, especially the bark, you'll say dicot. Well, that doesn't really tell me an awful lot. I have flirted with the idea of downloading, I think it's called Picture This or something like that. There may be some of the apps that are better on trees, but I don't find iNaturalist that good at it.
What I find that really helps is if you take pictures of the leaves, which can be difficult if the tree is very tall.
The other thing about iNaturalist, just for information of your watchers here, when you put a picture on iNaturalist, it's just a picture. And there are observers who look at your pictures and will help you identify them. If you don't know what the picture is, somebody else might identify it for you. So if I take a picture and put it on iNaturalist, and then somebody comes on and says, yes, you know, that indeed is a blue jay, then my picture becomes research grade, which is really a feather in your cap. Boy, you know, I have a research grade picture. And fortunately, you know, most of the pictures I put in are recognized by other people as being accurate, and they become research grade. Now, on the other hand, if somebody else comes on and disagrees and say, no, both of you are wrong, then it doesn't become research grade anymore, it goes down. So the more people you have agree with you, then the stronger the identification. And because these apps work on algorithms, the more people who take pictures, you know, the stronger the app gets at identifying different plants. The beauty of technology, it's really, really upped our game in conservation and stewardship.
It really is quite cool. I've actually tested one thing before, Gary, where I took a picture of garbage on the ground and it identified it as human.
Well, yes, I did that too. I was taking a picture of a bird on the screen of my computer screen, and my camera was pointed onto my lap, and it said human.
So it knows everything.
You also, because I, over the years, if there's a bird that I haven't been able to identify, I put it in a file called unidentified. And just the other night, I thought, I wonder if I was using Seek. I wasn't using iNaturalist now. Right. I was using Seek, and I pointed, and about 75% of the birds that I wasn't able to identify, Seek picked up on it. So now I know what they are.
Wow, so that's awesome.
Yeah, really, we know. It really, really, for me, when I, as a nature photographer and wildlife photographer, I was more interested in animals. If a bird parked itself in front of me, okay, I took a picture of it, and I didn't worry too much about the species. But now I've learned to just enjoy the sound of birds, mainly through being out in nature and relaxing, and then using some of these apps.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Gary, once again. We didn't have any more questions coming in, but there's just one more comment that says, thanks for all the great work that you do. And I agree, you are doing some wonderful work, and thank you for protecting so much of our nature. I wonder, before we say good evening, if you wanted to have any final words, Gary?
I think that I've probably used enough of your time right now. Thank you for being so patient. I noticed it's what, 8:10 right now, so
I'm blabbering away too, no worries.
Well, you know, don't encourage me. I could go on forever and ever, especially when it comes to the Bruce Trail and my photography, but I think that maybe you've heard enough of me for tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Gary, for joining us again. Hopefully we hear from you again in the future. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed, and stay in touch and see you out on the trails. Thanks, Gary.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.